The countries which are part of G20 are meeting in Indore to discuss agriculture. Many people have started feeling that the digital world will be able to give us many of what our needs are. But the digital world can never give us chapatis. The digital world can never dish out a bread. I have with me Dr. Rob Vos. He's a specialist and economist at IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, part of the CGIAR, which is again a part of the World Bank. And for full disclosure, I won the Science Journalism Excellence Award from the CGIAR long ago. Dr. Rob, how secure is the world on food?
It's secure in the sense that we do produce enough food to feed everybody. It's insecure because we still cannot get the food to all the people that need it. We still have an estimated 820 million people around the world that go to bed hungry every day. That means they cannot satisfy their minimum needs of calorie intake on a daily basis. So that's still a big problem, and unfortunately it's where we've seen a lot of decrease in food insecurity or numbers of hunger over the past decades. Over the past 7 years, it's been increasing again worldwide.
Well, to put it in perspective, when he says 820 million, that means more than double the population of the United States of America. Those are the numbers of people who are going hungry to bed every day. What can be done to reduce this hunger?
Well, in first instance, we need to give them better livelihoods and more stable and secure livelihoods, because poverty is the main driver of hunger and food insecurity, and also vice versa. Hungry people have also more difficulties in finding a decent livelihood. So we see most of the world's poor live off agriculture. So if we can improve the conditions in agriculture so that they can produce more productively, get better access to markets, but also that other means where they're really in dire straits, that there's enough social protection such they can access the food they need. And those would be steps. So agriculture and rural livelihoods are key to also attacking the problem of food insecurity.
Many of the world leaders are not keeping their eyes on the ball on agriculture and food security. And increasingly, like I said in the opening, there's a feeling that the digital world is where all the money is, and that's where everything should be moving. As somebody who understands food and security, is there some consensus likely to happen from this big G20 meeting where India is focusing very heavily on food security?
Well, certainly hope so. Certainly we've put a number of issues on the table that have found some resonance. Hopefully will be done something about it. It's not entirely true that governments ignore agriculture altogether. It's maybe relative to other things less, but still, if you take together all governments around the world, they provide an estimated $800 billion per year in support to farmers. The problem with that support is that it's very focused on just production improvements and productivity growth, and too little on how can we support the needs of smallholder farmers where the poor are. How can we get to better technologies that not just improve the conditions for farmers, but also produce more productively and make cheaper the foods that are the central foods that are the staple foods for local population. So a lot of the money goes into supporting wheat and soybeans and so on, which are also important products, but not in products like we're standing here in front of an exhibition for millet, not for teff, which are important for Ethiopian people, and so on and so forth. So we need to diversify that support, but particularly in ways that makes it adaptable to the circumstances of the poor countries where least of that technological innovation is taking place. And second, that we start doing that in sustainable ways and with sustainable practices. Because if not, then we may raise productivity now, but it will be gone tomorrow because of the impacts of climate change.
So do you think we need an evergreen revolution and not just a green revolution?
Yeah, I would always call it a green revolution or a real green revolution. The previous one was called green because it had to do with agriculture, but not because it was very concerned with maintaining the natural environment and avoiding greenhouse gas emissions and making optimal use of resources in sustainable ways. So that's what needs to happen now, and that really requires a transformation both of agriculture, of food systems at large, and with it of the livelihoods of people, such that we can get win-win solutions for the people, food security, less poverty, for the climate, so less greenhouse gas emissions, more resilience, but also for the economy. These are economic wins for economies at large.
Now, in this climate change and this scenario of global warming, do you think there's any role which genetic engineering and genetic modification can play in ensuring a food secure world?
I think so. It has a role to play. I know it's very controversial, but we have seen lots of techniques, and actually we're already applying a lot of gene editing. So you don't have to modify the species as it's someplace labeled. It's just modifying a little bit the sequence in the DNA of plants to increase not just productivity, but make them drought resistant. And otherwise more resistant against pests. The only thing to do is to do it in ways that it will be adaptable to and accessible to smallholder farmers, but also that they can own it. And not like what happened with the big crops, like wheat and maize, which were big companies that said, okay, you can get these, or you get my credit if you produce with these genetically modified seeds, but you cannot reproduce them. You have to continue buying from. So that would create a wrong situation with the monopoly of the technology, of the knowledge, and no way to reproduce the results and adapt the results so that it can also serve others. So I think there's a future there. You have to deal with it with caution so it doesn't create new wrongs to the agricultural sector.
So your suggestion would be to go for genetic modification in varieties and not go for hybrids, because in hybrids you need to have a new stock of seeds every year.
No, you need those that can be reproduced, right? But also that you know how to adapt them moving forward. And so I think that's what you would need to think through. But it's important that you don't get the kinds of seeds that you cannot reproduce, and you're dependent on big private companies to buy them at very high prices typically, and that's part of the problem why we can't see those kinds of improvements for smallholder farmers. They simply cannot afford it. But what I want to say is also that it can't be just about that. There are no simple technological fixes which say we have better seeds and then the problems are solved. No, everything needs to work with it, right? So we need to increase productivity through better seeds, but also through other techniques and practices that are sustainable, such that we have better soils, better access to markets, and that the whole supply chain functions in more sustainable ways.
Any succinct message for the leaders of G20 who will meet later in the year on what should be their call or on the joint statement on agriculture?
Well, one big message for me is to rethink their current support to the agricultural sector and realign it with all the goals I just mentioned, with food security, so also better productivity, with sustainability, and so that will involve not just subsidizing farmers, but actually making sure that they do it with sustainable practices, and also diversify food production such that we get a more diversified, but meaning also more like a more healthy supply of food, which is very important as well.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been focusing a lot on farmers and farming. He announced the Year of Millets, which was taken up by the United Nations as the Year of Millets, and he's been talking about doubling of the farmers' income, etc. Any succinct message for India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, you have always to. I'm an economist, so it's always about supply and demand, right? So we should not forget about the consumer and the people that buy the food, right? So is that the food that we're buying, is that good for them? How can we persuade them to buy better food? And also, so the incentives I was just talked about should not just be incentives for farmers to adopt better practices, but there should also be incentive to consumers to buy healthier food. So we have that one way of incentive is to make healthier food cheaper than it is now, but particularly also to make sure that what they buy is sustainably produced food and that they're aware of that. And governments and Dr. Modi equally so should think about that. So when we talk about agriculture, it's never just about farmers. It's about everybody. Because in the end, we all have to eat.
So that was Dr. Rob Vos telling us about something which in India we have always known. Everything else can wait, not agriculture. At the big G20 meeting on agriculture in Indore, Pallava, Bagla,